right, good morning. My name is John Whitaker, and I am glad to be with you today. Mike gets a Sunday where he doesn't have to preach, so it's good for him to have a little break. And I bring you greetings from Boise, Idaho. So came in from Boise last night, and excited to spend some time with you preaching this morning. And then we've got a parent connection thing we're doing after this, and tomorrow night I'm going to be doing some stuff on how to read and engage the Bible for yourself and how to grow in your faith through that. So excited to spend some time with you over the next handful of times together and days together. This series that Mike launched last week on Restored Out of the Chaos really gets at the heart of what God is intending to do in the world. And oftentimes we as Christians, churchgoers, followers of Jesus, we miss kind of the big scope of what God is up to. That God's purpose in the world is to restore all things. That things were good, got messed up, and we're culpable, we're responsible, we're part of the messing of it up, and God's intent is to restore all things back to what God intended for them in the first place. And so last week, Mike talked about the importance of belonging to Jesus and becoming a part of his family and following Jesus. And when you belong to Jesus, he'll make you fishers of men. Today, I want to look at a passage out of Luke chapter 6, and I want to look at specifically in us, like me, you, us as God's people, when we talk about restoring all things and being restored out of the chaos. What does that specifically mean for you as an individual follower of Jesus? And how then does that affect us as God's people in total? All right, that's what we want to talk about today. And a handful of years ago, my now son-in-law, then just my daughter's boyfriend, wanted to take us catfishing at his favorite family catfishing place. And he said the best time to do it is in the dark at night, so we got to go at night. It was about this time of year, so we left our house about 9 o'clock at night, and Joseph didn't know exactly where this place was because he'd always just gone with his grandpa and his dad, but he knew we'd go to Mountain Home, and then we turned south from there. So we got on the freeway, we headed towards Mountain Home. I got out my iPhone, we kind of knew the name of the reservoir. We put the name of the reservoir in Siri. We, exited a Mountain Home. We turned south from there. Siri's giving us directions now, telling us where to go. Turn here, turn there, proceed to Immigrant Road. And so we proceeded in the direction she told us. And we kept proceeding in the direction she told us. And we kept thinking, this doesn't feel right. Something doesn't seem quite right, but she was confident, Siri was. Keep driving forward, keep going forward. So we proceeded, listening to Siri, and then it's pitch black out. Now, we're in the middle of nowhere, it's dark, and we started looking around like, this really doesn't seem right. And the next thing you know, I stop the car, and I'm like, this road just ended. And we're in the middle of some farmer's cornfield. Literally, I'm right up against a sprinkler pivot. And I'm like, I think Siri's confused. Where in the world do we go? So we tried to backtrack in the dark, find our way. How did we get even where we're at? We managed to get back to the paved road. And at that point, my son-in-law got out his Android phone and put in and the Android got us there, right? Siri failed, but Android got us to the reservoir, and we made it. And the reality is that in life, just in driving even, right, your destination determines your direction. So if you want to go to X, right, like you've got to go a certain direction because that's the destination you're getting to, right? If you wanted to come, say you liked me after our spending time together the next couple of days and you decide, I want to go visit John in Boise, you're not going to head east. You're going to head west because your destination determines the direction, true? Right? So poor Siri had no clue. She had a very fuzzy idea of the destination we were heading to, and thus she couldn't give me very clear directions, and we ended up lost. Now, the reason I bring that up for us today is because as Christians, as followers of Jesus, disciples, if we don't have a clear sense of the destination that we're going to, we're going to get lost. We're going to get confused. And so this text that we're going to look at out of Luke 6 is critical because it tells us very clearly what's the goal of being a disciple of Jesus. What is the goal? What is the clear destination so that you can have a clear path for how to get there? And the reality is, you and I, if you're a follower of Jesus, or even if you're just a churchgoer, like you're here because you've been going to church for a little bit, the reality is we can go to church, we can be very religious, we can be a good Christian and not be a good disciple at all. Not be heading to the proper destination. So we need this, right? We need to know what's the destination we're heading to. Why are you a disciple? Where are you going? How will you know when you get there you've arrived at your destination? How will you know that? Unless you have the destination clearly in mind. A handful of years ago, was preaching a sermon at the last church I was pastoring at, and I was giving kind of a discipleship path, and I put it up on the screen, and I gave this path, and I kind of laid it out there for people, and after service, I'm out in the lobby after service, and there's people milling around and talking and visiting, and there's this one guy, his name was Chris, and he kind of kept walking past me, kept looking my way, and hanging out, and kept walking past, looking at me, and that's the pastor's cue that he wants to talk to me. So it was obvious he wanted to talk, but he wanted to wait till the lobby had cleared out a little bit. So when the lobby cleared out a little bit, he glanced my way, and I walked over to him. I said, "What's up, Chris?" And he said, you know that sermon you just preached? Yeah. And you know that kind of path you put up there where you talked about being kind of like new to the faith or young in the faith and then mature in the faith and all that stuff? I said, "Yeah." He said, I've been a Christian for about 10 years. Really working hard at what I knew to do, but I think I would put myself still in the new to the faith or young in the faith phase. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I've been going to church now for like 10 years, been a Christian for like 10 years, and because he was very involved in church. And he was like, I serve, I attend, and I tithe. Because that's all somebody ever told me I was supposed to do. But I don't think I'm a very good disciple of Jesus. I still think I'm just kind of new or young in the faith." So once you put that chart up there, now I knew where I was supposed to go. Can you tell me how to get there? Can you tell me how to get there? Right? Like, you could be a really, really good church member this morning and not be a good disciple of Jesus because you don't know the X that you're traveling to. You don't know the destination you're heading to. So, what's the goal of being a disciple of Jesus? Where are you trying to go? All right? That's what I want to look at from Luke chapter 6 this morning. We're going to look at this passage out of Luke 6, and I want us, by the time we're done, to at least have real clear in our mind. In 30 minutes, can't tell you everything about it, right? But at least have real clear in your mind, here's the destination. So at least you can begin proceeding in that direction. Okay? Luke chapter 6, and we're going to pick up in verse 39. This is Luke's version of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus has a huge crowd of people around him, including his newly appointed apostles. So he's got the 12 newly appointed apostles in the crowd. He's got people from all over the region around him. And you got people who are Jews who are very religious, right, but maybe not clear on exactly what God wants. You got newly appointed apostles who are just trying to figure out who Jesus is. You've got people in the crowd who are Gentiles who don't have a clue about what God wants. You got this whole gamut of people in this crowd. And Jesus is laying out sort of his vision for his kingdom and for being a follower of him. And here at this point, Jesus says this, verse 39. Now, he also spoke a parable to them. He's going to tell them a little story that has a point to help them understand what he's calling them to be. A person who is blind cannot guide another person who is blind. That doesn't work too well, right? Like two blind people trying to get somewhere doesn't work so well. So a blind person can't guide a blind person, can he? Will they not both fall into a pit? Step off a curb, get hit by a bus, right? Like we need more clarity than that. Then he says this, verse 40, a student is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he has been fully trained, will be like his teacher. When you hear the word student, what image comes to mind? What do you see when you hear the word student? Like Tommy over here, he works with students all the time, working for campus ministry, right? Students. We know in our context what the word student means. A student sits where? At a desk, in a classroom. And as the teacher is teaching, and he's writing on the whiteboard, he's putting PowerPoint up, right? The student is doing what? Taking notes on a laptop or writing it down by hand, taking notes. And as the student is taking notes, what's the objective for students in our context? Well, someday, maybe in 5 weeks, they're going to have a test. And they take the notes so that they can learn the information, so that they can pass the test, so that at the end of a course of study, they can get their degree. That's the way it works, right? Like, students in our context sit at a desk in a classroom, listening to a teacher teach with the objective of learning the information so they can get their degree, so they can go out into the real world and get a job. It's pretty much the way we think of school. Now, the word translated student, however, in verse 40 in Greek is mathetes, which is the word for disciple. A disciple, he says, is not above his teacher. So we're talking about disciples, not students in an American context. So when you read a text like this, right, we tend to put our picture into the context, into the word. But it's not our word, it's their word, and it's their world. So what was a disciple in their world? Disciples didn't learn at desks in Jesus' world. Disciples learned by attaching themselves to a rabbi, a teacher, somebody whose teaching of the scriptures they respected and they admired, and they attached themselves to that rabbi for the purpose of not just learning what the rabbi knew, but becoming what the rabbi was. I want to learn how to read the scriptures the way this rabbi does so that I can do life the way this rabbi does. That was the goal. And so you hear that in what Jesus says. Verse 40, a disciple is not above the teacher, the rabbi, but everyone, every disciple, when he's fully trained, will be like his teacher, like his rabbi. That was the goal. Jesus is just stating what everyone in his culture knew. This is just the way it worked. Discipleship worked this way. The goal was to become like your rabbi. So here's what a disciple is. I think we've got a summary that we can put on the screen. A disciple is someone who has rearranged their life to be with Jesus in order to become like Jesus. That's the way it worked. That's not necessarily the way it works in our world, right? Like you would never think per se of saying, I really want to be like my geometry teacher. My goal is to become like my biology teacher, right? That's not the way discipleship or students work in our world. But in Jesus' world, that's the way discipleship worked. As a young Jewish boy, or usually it was boys, rarely girls, but occasionally, right? So a young Jewish boy grew up. If he distinguished himself as a student of the Scriptures, he had the opportunity to become a Talmid or a mathetes, a disciple of a rabbi. And the goal was to be with them so that you could become like them. Jesus, speaking to this crowd of people, is saying, That's the goal of discipleship, and that's the goal of you in my kingdom. Your job as a follower of Jesus is not just to be really good at going to church. Your job as a follower of Jesus is not just to be a really good church member. This is hard for us as pastors. Who wouldn't want a church full of people who attend regularly, serve regularly, and give regularly? Right? That's what, pastors would be like, if I had that, man, life would be easy. But that's not the goal. That is not the goal. You could be a really good church member and not a good disciple, because a disciple has intentionally decided to rearrange their life to be with Jesus so that they can become like Jesus, like him from the inside out, like him in the full character of his personhood, like him in the things he loves, like him in the things he values, like him in the things he does. They think like him, and they will like him, and thus they act like him regularly and routinely. That's what it means to be a disciple. Now, Jesus goes on then in this text and says, but there's a problem. Here is a real hindrance, a real barrier to being a good disciple, to actually becoming like Jesus. And so he continues this teaching by highlighting something that will get in the way of your or my discipleship to Jesus. This is what he says, verse 41. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother or sister's eye, but do not notice the log that's in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, brother, let me take the speck that is in your eye out when you yourself do not notice the log that's in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the log out of your own eye, then you'll see clearly how to take the speck out of your brother's eye. This is a problem to our discipleship. Being a speck inspector will keep you from becoming like Jesus. In other words, Jesus is saying a disciple's goal is to be fully trained, which means you will be like me, like Jesus himself. But if we have this problem of noticing everyone else's shortcomings, if we're constantly paying attention to, oh, that person, that guy, if he just would. If we constantly see what's wrong with everyone else and we're not focused on actually removing the log from our eye, we're not going to become like Jesus. Because we're so focused on fixing everybody else, we actually don't have clarity to know how to fix ourselves. And this is a real problem. A spirit of, kind of a critical spirit, a spirit of disapproval, a spirit, it's what I call the black dot disease. Everyone knows what the black dot disease is. I walk into a classroom at Boise Bible College where I taught for a long time. I take my marker and I put a black dot on the whiteboard. And students come into the room and I ask them, what do you see on the whiteboard? There's like 99.8% white on the whiteboard. What do they see? Black dot. We do the same thing with people, right? We see what's wrong with them. We see what's wrong with them, and we want to fix it. We want to fix it. Like, ooh, there's your black dot. Oh, look at that speck. Oh, you've got that problem, if you just would. And as a result, our attention is drawn to everyone else's shortcomings, and we don't see our own. And what Jesus says here is, notice, there's a time and a place to remove specks. But what he says is, first take the log out of your own eye. First take that plank, that log, that big old beam out of your own eye. You're going around and finding this little tiny piece of sawdust that's attached to everybody else, and then you've got this big old beam. And what's the beam? Well, it's a superiority complex. That's the beam. The beam is a superiority complex. You think you can look down on everyone else and find what's wrong with them and fix them. That's the problem. And the moment you begin to turn your eyes, be a little more self-reflective, and and let, with Jesus and the Spirit and the Word, look at yourself more than look at others, what happens? Your perspective changes. And all of a sudden you start seeing your shortcomings, your weaknesses, your need for grace, right? You start to see where God needs to do more work on you. And all of a sudden you be a little more gracious with other people, right? You're a little more humble and a little less disapproving of other people. You're a little more loving and a little more caring towards others because you recognize, man, God loves me in spite of my shortcomings. I'm going to love you, right? And all of a sudden now, you can actually become like Jesus because you're letting Jesus show you what's wrong with you rather than you thinking you have the right to fix everybody else. Constantly feeling like we want to straighten everyone else out or fixing everyone else or looking on people with disapproval will keep us from becoming like Jesus. So we need to remove the log from our eye if we want to actually become like Jesus and be a good disciple. Remove the log, get rid of the superiority complex, and begin to look at yourself and let Jesus shape you and change you and form your heart. And so Jesus goes on then, and he says at the end of this section, he says, here's what your goal should be. Here's what you should be pursuing. Rather than being so religious that you want to fix everybody else, here's what you should really focus on in your life. Verse 43, he says, for there is no good tree that bears bad fruit. And likewise, on the other hand, there's no bad tree that bears good fruit. What should you focus on? Instead of focusing on everyone else's speck, as you remove the log from your eye, your objective, your goal, your vision should be focused on what? Becoming a good tree. Becoming a good tree. Jesus, I want you to make me a good, healthy, flourishing, vibrant tree. And when you're growing into a vibrant, flourishing, healthy tree, what happens? You naturally and routinely produce good fruit. That's just what he says. Good trees, healthy trees produce good fruit. Unhealthy, bad trees produce bad fruit. Right? If you're a bad tree and you're trying to fix everyone else, well, you're going to produce bad fruit in their life. Right? This is the way it's going to work. Good trees produce good fruit. Bad trees produce bad fruit. For, verse 44, each tree is known by its own kind of fruit. An apple tree is known for being an apple tree. An orange tree by producing oranges. The lemon tree, right, produces lemons. That's just the way trees work. It produces its own kinds of fruit. So he says it's known by its own fruit, for people do not gather figs from thorn bushes. They don't pick grapes from briar bushes. The good person, out of the good treasure of his heart, brings forth what is good. The good person, out of the good stored up in his heart, the good character, the good will that's stored up in his heart, just routinely and regularly produces what is good. The good person, out of the good stored up in their heart, produces what is good. And the evil person, the bad person, out of the evil stored up in their heart, brings forth what is evil. For the mouth speaks from that which is in the heart. Right? You squeeze a ketchup bottle, what's going to come out? Ketchup. Squeeze a mustard bottle, what's going to come out? Mustard. Right? You squeeze a good person, what's going to come out? Goodness. You squeeze a bad person, what's going to come out? Badness. What comes out of you is what's inside of you. So when life gets hard and when there's pressure and you're squeezed, what comes out of you? That tells you what's inside of you, right? Well, the stuff that comes out is the stuff that's inside. That's just the way it works. That's how Jesus ends this section. Here's the point of this last little section. What Jesus is getting at is that the goal of your following of Jesus is for you to become a genuinely good person. The imagery he uses is a good tree. Think of like an apple tree. Does a healthy apple tree have to try to produce apples? I really got to try to produce apples. I want to grow some big juicy apples today. Does a healthy, vibrant apple tree have to work hard at growing apples? It just grows them. It just grows healthy apples. It just does. No effort needed. It regularly, routinely does that. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, and about a block from my house, there was a white fence along the road, and over that white fence was this gulch, this gully that my friends and I used to there's some trails in it. We'd climb down in there. There were some vines. We'd swing on these vines. It's great fun. You could walk down through there, and you could end up at Puget Sound and go fishing or whatever else. So we would frequently go in this gulch. Well, one day, my friend Kurt and I were walking on the sidewalk along the white fence, and as we were walking along, off to our left, we looked over there like, hey, look at that. There's an apple tree growing just like 15 feet down the hill over the fence. And it had these softball-sized apples on it. And we're like, interesting, just growing there. So we hopped the fence, and we climbed down the hill, and we picked these apples. And they were the sweetest, juiciest apples I had ever had. Do you think that apple tree had to try really hard to produce those apples? No, it just happened to be in good soil, and it was a healthy tree, and it produced good apples. Jesus' point is, when you're a genuinely good person, you naturally and routinely produce good fruit. It just happens. Fruit just happens. You don't have to try. You don't have to try to be like Jesus. You don't have to think, what would Jesus do in this situation? You just do what Jesus would do. Why? Because of the good stored up in your heart, he says. It's just his character's in you. You're like him. And so you naturally do the things that Jesus would want you to do. Now, on the flip side, in a few months, we're going to celebrate Christmas. It's everyone's kind of favorite holiday, right? Like Christmas, at least a lot of people's. And you think of a Christmas tree. Christmas trees are beautiful, right? They're a beautiful thing. Every year, my family and I, we have a group of friends. We go up into the mountains outside of Boise, and we have a campfire, and we walk through the woods until we find what we think will be a nice Christmas tree. We saw the thing down. We bring it back. We throw it on the top of the truck. We take it back home, and we decorate the Christmas tree. We hang pretty ornaments on it. We put pretty lights on it, and it's beautiful. For how long? About 3 or 4 weeks. And about, the December 31st, January 1st, right? You're like, there are pine needles all over my floor. This tree is dying, and it is no longer pleasant to have in my house. I'm ready to be done with it and get it out of my house, right? So we undecorate the tree, we pitch the tree, and we throw it away. Because as beautiful as a Christmas tree is, it's a dead tree. It's a dead tree with ornaments hung on it. It didn't produce those ornaments. They're just hung on it. It's an artificial looking beauty that's not real. It's not natural. That tree is dead and dying, and we know it. And that's why we get rid of it after 3 or 4 weeks. We take all the ornaments off, we put it away. We get rid of that thing, right? And the reality is, you could be like a Christmas tree, or you could be like an apple tree. You could be a cut tree that's dead and dying, but you got a lot of pretty religious ornaments hanging on your life, right? You show up at church, you greet at the door, you smile, you say hi, right? You might even help out in kids ministry or youth ministry. Maybe occasionally you write a check, you give some money, and you look beautiful. You look like a good Christian. Everyone thinks you are a good Christian, but the character of your heart is not at all like Jesus. And your kids know it. Your grandkids know it. Your coworkers might know. Maybe you could keep it under wraps at home, but at work, your real character shows up, because when you're squeezed in life, what comes out of you is not Christ-like at all. It's bad fruit, because you're actually a bad tree that just hangs religious ornaments on the tree and looks beautiful for a time, but you're actually dead and dying. Jesus says the goal is for you not to be like a Christmas tree. It's to be like an apple tree that just regularly and routinely and naturally produces good fruit. Because on the inside, you're like Jesus. You're a good tree, and there's good stored up in your heart. Becoming a good tree is the goal of discipleship to Jesus. Where are you going? I'm going to become a good tree. That's where you're going. In other words, you're going to have the very character of Jesus stored up within your heart so that you regularly and routinely do the things that Jesus would do. So in your home with your kids, you're like Jesus and you respond to the circumstances of life the way Jesus would, where He living His life in your place. On the job, right? At the school, wherever it's at, what comes out of you is Jesus-like stuff, because Jesus-like stuff has been put into you through discipleship to Jesus. That's the goal, is to become like Jesus from the inside out. And when we say to become like Him, we mean like Him in both character and like Him in mission. That the character of your heart, the character of your life is full of Jesus-like stuff. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, that kind of stuff, that fruit is in you because Jesus has put it in you because you're a disciple of His. So the character of your life is like Him, and the mission of your life. In your sphere of influence, you are on mission with Jesus because you love the things that Jesus loves, and you want to see other people be restored out of the chaos too. And so the mission of your life is to get on board with what God is doing, which is the restoration of all things. And so in your little sphere of influence, in your family, maybe your extended family, maybe on your job, maybe, right? Like the goal of your life is increasingly matching the goal of Jesus. Now, are you perfect? Of course not. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. But as we mature as disciples of Jesus, increasingly and progressively, we're becoming like Him from the inside out. Here's what this means. You could be a brand new disciple of Jesus, way back here at that new to the faith stage. Like you could have just crossed from, I'm pre-faith, I now have confidence in Jesus and I want to follow Him with my life. Like you're brand new to following Jesus, you're a brand new disciple. Your character is not very much like His yet. You still lose your temper, right? You still gossip about people that you shouldn't. You still maybe have a speck problem and you're seeing everyone else's faults. You're not very loving or patient or joyful yet, right? Your character isn't very much like Him. But you've rearranged your life to be with Jesus, knowing that as you do that, someday, by the power of Jesus in you, you're going to become significantly like Him, substantially like Him, so that someday you will arrive at maturity in Christ. And that means the character of your life and the mission of your life looks a lot like Jesus' character and mission. That's where you're going. The goal of the transformation of your life is to become like Jesus from the inside out. Now, how do you do that? How do you do that? You do that through discipleship to Jesus. You do that through being a disciple of Jesus, which means what? You rearrange your life to be with Him, so that He can teach you how to live your life the way He would were He you. If Jesus were walking around in your shoes with your relationships and your job, right, how would Jesus live your life? He wants to teach you that. And as you're His disciple, He will. He'll teach you how to do that. So how do you become a good tree? Through discipleship to Jesus, by rearranging your life to be with Him with the explicit goal of becoming like Him. So, look at your life. Examine your life. Where are you going? What's the goal of your life? Is the goal of your life to actually become like Jesus? Is the reason you do religious things like go to church so that could be an opportunity to be with Jesus so that you can receive His wisdom and His strength and His grace so that you could become a little bit more like Him? Is the reason that you serve at church not just because, well, they said they need volunteers, but I do this as a way of presenting myself to God so that I can become more like Jesus because He was a servant, so I want to be a servant? Right? Is the way you interact with your wife, your kids, your extended family, is the way you do that all motivated by Jesus? Would you teach me how to love the way you have loved me? And help me get better at that through laying down my life for them like you laid down your life for me? Like the whole focus of our life shifts towards pursuing becoming like Jesus while being with Him. So look at your life. Have you intentionally rearranged your life to be with Jesus? Have you intentionally rearranged your life? Like, do you routinely and regularly carve out times to be with Jesus intentionally, opening yourself up so that he can show you how you need to grow and change, so that he can show you who he wants to make you to be, and how you can become more and more a good tree. Are you doing that? Could you do that more? Are there ways you could spend more time with him as you go about your regular life, intentionally inviting him into what you're doing, intentionally being mindful of him, with the explicit goal of letting him teach you how to live your life? What does that look like for you? What does it look like to rearrange your life, your real life, your everyday life? Like, how could you invite Jesus into it and intentionally rearrange your life to be with him? That's what it means to live as a disciple. And that's how we become good trees. And Jesus' goal is to restore you and to restore me from the brokenness of this world and our life in such a complete sense that we regularly and routinely produce good fruit. That people could look at us and say, you're different. Your joy, your love, the peace with which you interact with people and you deal with circumstances, and the amount of patience you have, your graciousness, and your consideration and sensitiveness to others, you're different. And they may not know exactly why you're different, but they can see the difference, that there's something about you that's different. And that difference is Christ being formed in you. And that, my friends, Jesus says, is the hope of glory. And so, as the band comes, we're going to sing a song. I want to invite you to just reflect. Look at your life. Am I intentionally doing that? Am I intentionally rearranging my life to be with him? Am I intentionally rearranging my life because I don't want to just be a good Christian. I don't want to just be a good church member. I want to be like Jesus from the inside out. I want him to make me a good tree. So as we sing this song, as we reflect on this passage, these words, would you examine your life and ask yourself prayerfully, Lord, show me how I need to become more like you. And show me how I can rearrange my life to do life with you to that end. Let's stand and let's reflect as we sing.